even know, how do you spell that?
VOXY.
Okay.
It's free, and it's for people like us, and it's supposed to be HIPAA compliant. So
Very nice.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, it's streaming live on Facebook, it says.
Awesome.
Yeah, we've got some more people coming. Hi, everybody. It's so beautiful out today. It's amazing.
Do you want us to turn our video and sound off while you're talking?
Well, Sarah, what do you think?
So I will mute everyone once you start talking, and I'm going to switch us over to speaker view. You'll probably want to switch over to speaker view as well, but you don't have to turn your video off. I think that will be fine, or you can. Either way, doesn't matter. It might help Jean if she sees our faces and if we have that perplexed look then.
So Denise, how did you hear about the meeting today?
It just came up on Facebook.
Okay.
So I was like, yeah.
Wonderful. Sarah, I was just telling a group today about your display that you had at the museum.
Yeah, it was really well received, and I have a whole lot of data from it, from our visitors who filled out their ACEs tests. So sometime I'm gonna have to put that data into some format that can be analyzed, but it was very popular. It was, and it's just a good topic for us.
Yes, absolutely. Do you think that you'll rerun the display at some point, or how do you do that?
Yep. So it was kind of part of the temporary exhibit that we had with Stephen Head's Secrets, Family Secrets exhibit. And so we had it out in the hallway. We have switched that display out right now with an Arthur Kraft exhibit. Arthur Kraft was a patient at the state hospital in St. Joseph, and he was an artist. And his work is amazing. And so we have the Arthur Kraft exhibit up now. But whenever we change that out again, we'll definitely try to make room for the ACEs exhibit to go back up. If we continue to use that front wall where it was, then I'll switch it out and move it to a different location. But I think it's something I always want to have on hand to talk about.
Yeah, that's awesome. Hi, Chris.
Hello, how are you?
Welcome. Yeah.
Glad to be here.
Should we,
everybody?
Sarah, what time do we actually, we're right exactly at 3. Do we want to get started, or do we want to wait another minute or so? Or
I think we could go ahead and get started. People are kind of jumping on, but we're live on Facebook. And so I want to say, I think I'll just start and say, my name is Sarah Wilson. I'm the executive director for the St. Joseph Museums, and that includes the Glore Psychiatric Museum in St. Joseph. And that museum tells the history of the state hospital that was in St. Joseph. We have been working I think I've been working with Jean for probably 5 years now on something that we call as Rotarians, our St. Joseph Rotary Club, as a trauma project, which is a trauma-informed education model. And she's an amazing speaker and presenter, and the topic is really relevant to the Glore because it kind of helps us contextualize and sometimes understand mental illness and how trauma can affect the brain. So I'm going to have you go ahead and take it over, Jean, and let you go. For the people who are on the Zoom chat, I'm going to mute everyone. So if you can just unmute yourselves, and then if you want, you can switch to speaker view so that you can just see Jean as she's presenting. Feel free to leave your videos on, but that's how we're going to do it. And then we'll have comments in the chat if you have questions that we can ask her, or we can unmute after she's done presenting and ask her some questions. So go ahead, Jean.
Hello. Hi, I'm Jean West, and I am a school social worker with the St. Joseph School District. And I've started down this journey. I was actually during this time, I've been doing a lot of office organizing and looking, at different things I've been doing and getting them in ship shape, and started down this road in 2009, believe it or not, with the very first conference I went to. And it was from an organization called the National Institute for Trauma and Loss in Children. And it is a fantastic organization. They're out of Detroit, Michigan. And what had happened was at that point, there was an initiative within St. Joseph called Circle of Hope. And they had received a federal grant for bringing evidence-based practices to our community. And I was chair of the evidence-based work group, and our job was to say, what can we bring here that will truly help our kids and families, that will begin to make a difference within our community? And one of the things that we discovered was that our Northwest Missouri region had the highest rate of ADHD diagnosis for children in the entire state of Missouri. And we were really kind of flabbergasted, because we're like, why would that be? What is it about Northwest Missouri and specifically St. Joseph that would cause that? And we thought, well, what else could possibly explain some of those symptoms? And we kind of at that point in 2009 stumbled across trauma informed care and everything that goes with it. And I said, hey, here's this organization, they're having this conference. If I can go to this, I'll come back and give just a little mini speech to whoever's interested on the topic, if it helps. And that was, gosh, if I remember correctly, I'm thinking we did that at the St. Joseph Youth Alliance, and there was like maybe 4 people there. And that was the beginning of what we have done. And it was, but I went to that first conference and I was just like, this is it. There is just so much common sense to this message of how trauma impacts the brain. And we built and built and built from there. And we've done lots of wonderful things throughout this time period. We were able to take some big steps forward. I originally worked with our homeless program with the school district, and noticed just, we do great things with our homeless program. A lot of it, though, is we give them food and clothes and school supplies and things like that, which they need. Obviously, it's extremely important. But I was just starting to look at, like, what about the emotional and social wellness of these kids, and what can we do? And so we started to link the homeless program with the trauma program. And through that, we were able to hook up with another national organization, the Child Trauma Academy. And they are centered in Houston, Texas. And their director is Dr. Bruce Perry, who has written an incredible book called The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. And I always talk about that, and I call it the Trauma Bible. If you read one book on trauma, I would highly recommend that book. And they have a couple of trainings that I was able to go through. The first one is called the Neurosequential Model in Therapeutics and the Neurosequential Model in Education. And the first one is really for therapists, and gives an assessment platform of how looking at kids and what they've gone through, even intrauterine, and all the way up until their current point of time, and how looking at how what they've gone through has impacted where their brain is at, but also the relationships that they've had and how that has been a buffer for the trauma. Because one thing we find with trauma is that if you have a safe, supportive, caring adult in your life, you can go through some pretty hard stuff, but still turn out pretty darn good in a lot of situations. That's what tends to make the biggest difference. And a lot of times we think it's all these wonderful therapeutic interventions we do, which are all good, don't get me wrong, but it truly is the relationship that makes the difference with healing. So I was trained in those two things. And then that's when the Rotary came on board, because we were able to write our first Rotary grant. And with that, we were able to train one teacher within the district and to give supplies to his classroom. And we had such incredible results from that initiative. We just kept going. The next year, we gave supplies to 4 teachers in their classrooms, and our school district actually paid through their professional development funds for those 4 teachers to receive the neurosequential model in education training. Then last year, the Rotary sponsored our annual recertification day for TLC. And I will tell you, there is actually now a free online course through their organization. If any of you are interested, it takes about 6 hours, but it actually helps you to become certified if you are interested with the National Institute for Trauma and Loss in Children. You need 5 courses total, but you could take this one for free and get a really good introduction. So if you are interested in that, what you would want to do is just Google starr.org. Well, that's actually their site. And you'll look under courses. And the name of the course is Trauma Informed and Resilient Schools is on the education track. And on the clinical track, the name of it is Children of Trauma. And so either one of those courses or both of those courses you could do for free right now. So moving back to where we are as far as community-wide, we did, the Rotary sponsored that day last year. And so we were able to have more community members and give them all a free book and give them free CEUs for those who signed up for that. Then the next step, we had a huge Rotary grant this year, and what we did with that. I'm sorry, I'm talking about this, but I kind of want you to see the big picture, and then we're going to go down into the specifics of trauma in the brain, of really all the wonderful things we've been doing in our community and in our district. So this year, all 3 districts for the first time ever worked together to write a grant, and we were able to get 4 regulation rooms within our schools, which is where kids go to regulate their emotions when they become overwhelming. And so we started out with having scheduled times for those children who are tier 3 or really struggling at school. And so we had to cut that off, obviously, at spring break, but up until that point, we were really getting some wonderful data that the kids were going back to class ready to learn. And it was having a really good impact on our school students. We also put 60 comfort corners in classrooms, which are kind of like safe spots. They're little corner areas where you have a big Joe chair and some little stress manipulatives and books and crayons and things that the kids have permission to get up and get themselves in a better place and learn how to do that without having the teacher have to do that. Then there were some other parts to that grant as well. And the last grant I want to talk about really quick is we also have been awarded a global Rotary grant, which is absolutely amazing. And we'll be working on that as we move forward this fall. And we'll have 25 master ACEs trainers within our community, which will bring me to the ACEs training. And we'll be doing parent meetings monthly. We're going to be doing community public relations on trauma and adverse childhood experiences and doing some amazing things within our community. So look for more information on that. And maybe we'll do one of these every, I don't know, quarter or something, Sarah, where we could give updates on what's going on there and how community members could be involved, because it's going to be, I just think it's going to be amazing. So I just wanted to give everybody kind of an overview of where we are as a community and a school district. And then now we're going to move more down into individual information. The Adverse Childhood Experiences Study was facilitated in the late 90s by Dr. Robert Anda and Dr. Vincent Felitti. And it goes by the name of ACEs. And what it looks at is when kids have different traumatic experiences within their childhood, and they don't have those buffers. They don't have that wonderful aunt or that pastor or that one parent or 2 parents or whoever it may be that helps them to process what they've gone through, then they tend to get stuck. And that's when we see the symptoms of trauma. And the symptoms of trauma can kind of zoom out into two areas. There is the disassociative type of reaction where someone really almost shuts down. We may find the dark art, the self-mutilation. A lot of times they don't like to work in groups. They don't like to be with people. They like to isolate themselves. And really, basically, they're just turning into themselves at that point. And we've all seen individuals like that. The problem is they tend to be most at risk because they're not causing any trouble in school. They don't want anybody to notice them. They don't want anyone to know what's going on. So they have a tendency to not tell others. And I've worked with, I can think of really a lot of people, but one person is specifically a client that I had who was an adult female who was abused as a child, sexually abused as a child, and physically abused as a child. And she really did turn inward. She ended up doing well, as you know, within her family and her career, but she had lots of bumps along the way and did not really begin the process of digging through that trauma and until her 40s. She just turned into herself and said, I'm not going there. You know, I'm just going to act like this didn't happen in my life and work hard and be the best person I can be. But that's really hard to just keep within ourselves and never be able to share our story and heal. So that's one track. The other one this is going to be the individual that's causing chaos. And whether if you're talking about a child, then you're talking about probably lots of problems at school and home, lots of behavioral issues, because they're letting you know there is something wrong. And so there can be disobedience and clinging and aggressiveness, trouble focusing, trouble remembering information, and a lot of symptoms of trauma, when you look at them, can look like symptoms from other diagnoses as well. So you may have kids that really look like ADHD that maybe are not. And I think that that's been a huge problem. One of the books I recommend, this is kind of cool doing this because you know how I'm always talking about books. I can pull back I can turn around and get a book. So that makes me really happy. But here we go. Actually, see, like the trauma thing on my shelf's #1. So here's my top 3 books. This one is what we were just talking about, The Deepest Well by Dr. Nadine Burke Harris. And we're actually doing a book study in this in all different areas of our community. We have 10 different schools doing it. We have the United Way, we have the juvenile office. I just met with, well, I didn't meet, but I handed the books out to the behavior interventionists at the schools. Several organizations, the museum, Sarah, you guys were thinking about doing this as well. The Rotary itself may do this, but this book talks about the study with adverse childhood experiences and how different communities are beginning to screen, whether you're talking about kids or adults, for what they have gone through in their childhood. Because what that study showed is that the more issues we have as a child, if we don't have that buffer, the more likely we are to have medical and mental health issues as an adult. Dr. Nadine Burke Harris is the author of the book, and the 10 ACEs are physical, sexual, and emotional abuse, and physical and emotional neglect, domestic violence, incarcerated parents, mental illness in the home, and substance abuse in the home. The last one is parental separation. So if you had a parent, whether they were divorced or they took off and they moved wherever and they were separated from you. So those were the things that Dr. Anda and Dr. Filiti looked at. And it's really pretty interesting how their study started out as an HMO that was working with individuals who were struggling with their weight in California. And they all started being very successful and doing well until they got the weight off. And then it was like they quickly gained it back. And they're like, what's going on here? What are we doing wrong? Decided to ask them, for lack of knowing what to do, let's try to see if there's any similarities in their lives. So they started asking them what had happened to them as children. And come to find out, they found out more than they ever thought they would. And as a lot of scientific research happens, they found out as an accident, because Dr. Filiti was talking with an individual female, and he said, instead of saying, how old were you when you had your first sexual experience, he said, how much did you weigh when you had your first sexual experience? And the lady goes, I was 40 pounds. It was my father. And the doctor was like, whoa, I'm a medical doctor. Like, I didn't even want to go, I don't want to go down this road. I'm not I don't deal with this. Let me give you the number of a psychiatrist or something. But he said, I wonder if there's something here. And they ended up coming up with these 10 questions that they asked 17,000 people in their study. And they found that if you have four or more of these adverse childhood experiences as a child, then you are much more likely to have the mental health or medical issues that are associated with these. And that is depression, suicidal ideation, heart disease. Really, the 10 major things that Americans die from have all been linked to adverse childhood experiences. Which is just crazy, isn't it? It's just hard to imagine. So there are many places across the United States that are beginning to look at, how do we screen our kids? How do we find out if they're going through these things, and try to wrap around them, try to get these buffers in place so that they'll have the support that they need. And that's a conversation we are actually having in our community. I've spoke with Northwest Health Services, who are actually reading that book right now, The Deepest Well. Everybody, of course, right now is dealing with the coronavirus. So this is on the back burner, I'm sure, but they started down the road and they're thinking, how can we implement this? And that's one of the goals that we have, whether it's through our school district or whether it's through our pediatric offices, to begin to screen our kids for ACEs, so that we can say, hey, we know that if you have 4 or more ACEs, you are, I think it's like 15 more times likely to try to commit suicide. I mean, it's a huge number. Why can't we use that to our advantage and say, we need to have things in place for this child because there's so much more at risk? How can we put supportive people in their path? How can we connect them to supportive community agencies that will be those buffers for them, so they don't have to go through these situations alone? So that's kind of the ACEs study. Trauma's impact on the brain is just incredibly, how do I want to say it? Just as deep as you want to go, right? What we find is that the younger you are when you experience the trauma, the more likely it will have a bigger impact on you, which is kind of interesting, because a lot of people will say, I don't know about that, because they can't even remember what has happened to them. If they're under 3 or so, we're not going to have the cognitive memory of, oh yeah, I remember this or I remember that. But there is something that's called the body remembers, because trauma can actually be stored within our nervous system and our tissues and our muscles. It's not just a brain memory. It's an implicit memory instead of an explicit memory, which means it's stored as a sensory memory. It's not stored as a 1 + 1 + 1 A, B, C, D kind of thing. It's not a linguistic memory. So the younger you are, it impacts your brain in the sense of, it impacts the way the neurons connect. When we have developmental trauma, which developmental trauma means you have situations on an ongoing basis, our brain grows according to the experiences that it has. the neuronal experiences. And so say we have a sensory experience, we smell something and we don't know what that is, say as a, I don't know, we'll say 3 or 4-year-old, and we're like, that smells good. And mom says it's chocolate chip cookies. Here, try one. And we're like, wow, that's awesome, right? That sounds pretty good right now. I wish we had chocolate chip cookies for a Zoom meeting. That would be fun. And then they're like, that's great. And then it happens over and over again, however often. At some point, that child realizes, okay, a chocolate chip cookie is this taste, and this is what it looks like. And so the neurons have connected into that is what comes up in their mind and in their sensory memory when they think of a chocolate chip cookie. So it can be good or it can be bad. Let's look at that with, let's say there's a domestic violence situation and a child lives with a father and mother, we'll just say, and father is the abuser. And it happens over and over again. And so when they hear the loud voice, or dad comes in and slams the door, or they hear the sound of his fist going through the wall, that's also a neuronal connection. Okay, loud, mean voice, dad, male, the certain look in the eye, those can all be neuronal connections. And what happens is, let's say that child goes to school and they have a male teacher that gets a little upset one day because the 25 kids in class are like going crazy, right? And he starts to get kind of loud, and gets that look in his eye. And that child, again, can have one of those two reactions where they just simply shut down amongst themselves, or we have the big behavioral outburst. That's when people tend to say, where did that come from? That doesn't make any sense. He doesn't act like that. And it can be a sensory trigger for what has happened in that individual's past. With PTSD, there are 4 clusters, and the first one is re-experiencing. And PTSD is when someone gets to the point where they're basically stuck. Their brain is stuck. They're not moving past the trauma that they have gone through. So re-experiencing is the first category in the DSM-5, which probably a lot of you may know, but that's where you're having the nightmares, maybe flashbacks. Flashbacks are actually kind of rare, although we hear about that with veterans and that type of population. But in general, we really don't see that often. But we have more of what's called intrusive thoughts, where you're sitting there and you're trying to focus on whatever it may be, and then the thought comes into your mind, bam, I remember this. And it's like you truly are living that over again. You have a body reaction to that sensory memory. And so it's not like, oh, I remember blah, blah, blah. You really feel like you're living it over again. And that's why it's so difficult for those individuals to overcome, because it feels like a new reaction each time. It's kind of like with the veterans, when they hear the loud noise and they drop to the ground, their body, if you take their heart rate, their physiological reaction is going to be just as it was many times when they were in the war zone, because it's ready to fight, flight, freeze. So re-experiencing, and then avoidance is another cluster. And that's where we don't want to go anywhere or see anyone or do anything that reminds us of what we have been through. So let's say I have an individual that I work with who had a very bad experience at a hotel. And he says, every time I drive by a hotel, my body just, I just feel the tension in my body. And so that's an example of a trauma reaction, and his body saying, danger, this could be potentially dangerous to you, and reliving that. So avoidance, and I mean, we all do that to a certain extent in life, just normally, to certain things that we don't like or have bad memories with, but this is an exaggerated response. So re-experiencing and avoidance, negative changes in mood and cognition is the next cluster, and that basically means depression and anxiety, and that can be very connected with trauma. depression. A lot of times individuals I work with have heightened anxiety. I can think of a client that I have who is an adult female that went through 2 tornadoes. And she says whenever she watches the news, she literally, um, she has this little room down in the basement, and she'll take her cat and she'll take extra cat food and she'll take all this stuff, because for her, like, truly that could happen again, whether it's a warning, it's, whatever level of weather it is, it becomes a very, very scary occurrence for her, and she is ready for the worst because, again, she has that body reaction. So negative changes in cognition or mood. And then the fourth category is hyperarousal. And that means that those individuals struggle with a heightened sense of what is going on in the world. It's like they're always sitting on the edge of their seat. I am worried someone's coming in the door. I am worried that if I go to this place, this is going to happen. It's like this just think about like you're walking into a job interview today, right? You've got this like heightened, oh, I just want to make sure I look okay, and then I know what I'm talking about, and you've got this nervousness about you, right? It's like those individuals carry that with them almost 24/7. It's just this heightened nervousness and ready to jump in a moment's notice if something else bad happens. So those are the 4 clusters. And what happens with trauma, there's kind of there's different parts of the brain, and I don't know that you can see my wrist, but I like to explain it this way. This part of your arm is the brain stem, and it forms first intrauterine. And so this is all formed by the time we're born, and this is in charge of our blood pressure and our heart rate and our breathing and things that we don't even think about on a daily basis. It's just taken care of. Then we move into our limbic system, which is really where trauma impacts the most, because there's a little thing called our amygdala, and that's like the fire alarm that says danger. I see something, I smell something, I hear something, I taste something, somebody touched me, and it reacts to, this is just like this other thing that happened. Up here in this part of the brain is your prefrontal cortex. This is your thinking part of your brain. And this part is your top-down regulation, meaning I can talk myself down out of this. I can say, okay, Jean, that was then, this is now. Take a deep breath. You're okay. You can make it through this, right? Bottom up regulation is when we need those sensory activities. We need to get up and move. We need to get us a drink of water. We need to maybe have a stress ball or something there that actually requires a sensory part to it, instead of the verbal, the thinking part being able to calm us down. Because what happens when our body senses that amygdala senses it, it kind of takes over the brain, and that prefrontal cortex is not able to think and rationalize as it would and say, you're okay. This just kind of takes in charge and says, I don't feel safe. If you're in a scary situation and someone says to you, you're okay, it's not scary, does that really make you feel better? Not really. I mean, if it's somebody you love, you may trust them and say, well, that might make me feel a little better, but it really doesn't make it better. You've got to maybe move to a different place or get a different angle where you can see better, or, I'm walking in this dark neighborhood and maybe it's really not safe. So we have to trust that sensory part of that as well, because it's there as a message. With those who've gone through trauma, it just tends to be overreactive, and it's basing what it's doing on past experience instead of what's going on in the present right now. So the most effective way to help individuals who have gone through trauma is really through, number one, a healing relationship. Being able for them to share their story is important if they choose. It should never be forced. It should never be, you really have to do this to move forward. It should be more of this is something that I find helps individuals when they're able to really be able to tell their story in a sensory way. And the program that I use from the National Institute for Trauma and Loss in Children uses drawing to do that. And I ask the kids to draw me, or adults, I do this with adults, draw me a picture you can tell me a story about. And it has nothing to do with how good they draw. It has to do with them being able to take those scary images and the sensory information and put it down on a piece of paper and be able to share that out loud and begin to make sense, to develop a narrative to their story. This happened, then this happened, then this happened, in a non-judgmental environment with somebody that just accepts that, okay, how do we move forward from here? You know, what's the next step to healing? So it's a wonderful program. I really have used it hundreds of times with individuals and believe in it. And I know Denise, you're certified in that and have used it as well, and still use it, I assume, with the other tools that you have. So I think what I want people to take away from this is that trauma has a huge impact on really the structure and function of how a brain develops. We're finding out more and more that if it happens as someone is a child, when they're a child, it can impact, like, for example, the size of their hippocampus, which is in charge of memory, can actually be smaller when they've gone through excessive trauma. The amygdala can be larger because it's had to be used more. It's overreactive. So that in turn impacts how they see the world, really. It sets a template for what individuals believe others are like. And if you grow up and you don't believe people can be trusted, then it impacts your relationships in a pretty obvious way. So I've kind of just been talking about different aspects of this, but if you have some specific questions, or if there are other things you all would like to share with your work or your experiences, I would love to do that, and we can talk about that. If someone wants to ask a question or has comments about the work that they do or what they've gone through or what they've learned, please just unmute and we'll share with each other.
Jean, I had a question. So with this sort of a large community crisis that we're experiencing with the COVID pandemic, how do you think that's going to be impacting our kids, ourselves? What are some coping mechanisms that people can use to minimize the trauma for themselves?
That's a really good question, Sarah. I think it could potentially have a very big impact. One thing that will make the difference is, number one, how much we expose ourselves to it through the media. I think we have to be careful. I think we want to be knowledgeable and we want to know what's going on and be wise and learn the new updates. But I honestly have worked with individuals, like, they'll sit there and watch the news. They'll watch CNN or whatever all day long during this. I'm like, that's not good because that's too much bad information. So pick a couple of news shows that you trust to stay updated, and then focus more on what you can do as a person to better yourself during this time. Okay, I'm stuck at home. Can I read? Can I do an online program? Can I develop better relationships with my family? That's something I've heard a lot from families, which is a positive, that we are stuck here together. And at first it was kind of World War II, but like now we're, hey, we might as well make the best of this. So let's start playing board games again, and let's watch movies together instead of just running and never talking. A really good book that I would recommend for families is 7 Habits of Highly Effective Families by Stephen Covey. It has some wonderful activities that you can do. So one thing is to limit your media coverage. And then I think another thing that will determine how traumatic this can be is, again, how adults are buffers for kids. Adults can say, oh my gosh, it's the end of the world. Like, what are we going to do? The children pick up on our anxiety, right? I've worked with many families, well, lots of kids who their parent themselves have a lot of anxiety and inadvertently have kind of transferred that down because of their response to crisis. And so I know it's a time of being unsettled and uncertainty, but try to be confident with what you tell your kids. This too shall pass. We'll get through this. We're going to do the best we can, and we'll learn and we'll grow from it. And things will go back to, if not the exact same way they were, they'll be kind of normal here, hopefully before too long, and be an encouragement, and don't let them see how anxious you are really feeling. So that's a good question, because that is definitely on everyone's mind.
Jean, can you discuss kind of the therapy dogs and therapy animals and their role?
Yes.
With regard to trauma.
Absolutely. And Chris, I just saw one of the dog owners today, because we met at my school, because I did not have my Deep Well books out of the school. And so we had to get permission, and the principal had to come and go in the school and get the books. And then they stood in this big circle 6 feet apart, and they all came up and got their book. So I said, hey, what does this mean for you and your dog? Because how when you're doing training, you can't just sit there and miss 3 months of it and go back to where you were if you're in a key developmental stage, right? And so they're still able to train their dog. But with the the district Rotary grant, something we've been able to do is we have 3 behavior interventionists within the district. I think there's a weird noise. So, thank you. Whatever that was. 3 of our behavior interventionists have purchased their own dogs and believe so much in the initiative of therapy dogs that they've started taking them to a professional trainer to get them trained to work within the schools. And so with the district Rotary grant, that was one thing we had put in the grant we were really hoping could happen at Edison. But there were so many hoops liability wise we had to jump through with the school district. We just couldn't get it to go through the first way, but we ended up being able to kind of go through the back door, as long as those 3 individuals took ownership of the dogs. And therefore there was no question of where the dog would go if the person left and went to another school district, et cetera, who feeds the dog, who pays for the dogs, all that stuff. So the Rotary grant is going to be able to reimburse, if not the whole amount, a good portion of the amount to those dog owners for the training of those 3 dogs. And so they will begin to use them in their work with kids. And we have found that to be so productive in other districts, because kids respond to animals. They respond to their calmness. And a lot of times, if they won't settle down or calm down for anything else, they'll calm down when they see a dog come, and they can pet the dog, and the dog can sit there and just be present with them. So I'm very excited about that. I was just talking with a veteran today. That's one of the things I do through my private practice. And it was pretty neat. He used to say he was a cattle rancher and had, a farm and all this stuff. And he said he used to be a horse breaker. And I said, really? Now that's interesting. So I said, how did you break the horses? Like, I would like to know what worked. And he said, well, I could talk all day about that. He said, but it's truly different for every horse. Some horses responded to one thing, and then the next one you'd have to try something different. And I said, that's just like our kids. You can't say with trauma work, well, we do A, B, C, D, and it works with every kid, because it does not. It's a very individual intervention, and you have to find what that child responds to. And so I think the therapy dogs are going to be a very strong intervention. The regulation rooms, the comfort corners, but when you look at kids' personalities, some kids just gravitate towards art, or they gravitate towards writing stories or movement. Some kids, I have a little guy that I worked with, he had to move, and he would throw a football and we'd play catch and talk. And we had and through the Rotary Grant, the regulation room, there's oh, I can't even remember the name of it. It's where they go and jump on it, but he'd jump on that things 20 times. I mean, and that's what calmed him down. That's what got him to go back to class in a better state and ready to sit and learn. So you kind of have to find what individually works for each person. And really that's true on an adult level as well. You know, there's things that calm us down, right? And other things we try, like that didn't do it again. That made it worse. Right. So we have to know that for ourselves and learn those coping skills. If this makes me feel better, that's where a lot of people get into substance abuse, unfortunately, because they'll use drugs or alcohol to try to lower anxiety, when we know long term that's just going to cause a whole other list of troubles. Hi, I can't hear your audio. I'm sorry. There.
Can
There.
you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh,
Hey, hi.
okay. Hi, Jean. I'm just wondering what schools, and in particular our St. Joe district, will need to consider when the school year starts back up, because I'm sure we acknowledge that issues like building decisions are going to be so low priority now compared to the behavioral matters that are going to need to be addressed, and safety matters. So
Are you asking which schools had the regulation rooms, or which ones we're considering for the next ones? Or
I think I'm thinking big picture, like the district priorities, that maybe we need to get off the concern about one mega high school and look at how we can address the needs that are surely going to be very apparent when we do get to start back in regular school settings.
yes, that's a good question. First of all, I think we need to realize right off the bat that this is a very scary thing for kids. It's not their norm. When you think of how difficult it is for a transition within school for some kids, like if music is canceled, it's the end of the world, right? I mean, think how big this is. Like school is canceled for, it seems like a very long period of time to us. Just think how long it seems like to the kids, right? So I think we need to be thinking there are kids who are going to be very impacted by this. What can we have waiting to help them? And so we may want to come up with some kind of screening process, even to see where they are at and to see which kids are really struggling. And we could come up with a survey really that we give all of our kids that says, hey, are you having nightmares? Are you having intrusive thoughts? Are you having a hard time getting past what has happened? Did you have a family member directly impacted? Those kinds of things. So we would know those kids maybe who are struggling. And so through the counselors, the school social workers, the behavior interventionists, hopefully we could pull them in one-on-one and kind of, I love doing that. I would do that all day long. We did that with the Signs of Suicide program, and it just blew me away how open they were to the problems they were having, because they truly needed help and they wanted help. And they'd say, hey, this is what's going on and this is what's going on. And so we could maybe do some groups in our schools. I think that we should probably have a group at every school for kids who are struggling to make it through this process and get back to the normal. And yes, talk about what we've been through, but move very quickly into how do we heal and what kind of coping things can we do to lower our anxiety and get back to our normal, right? And post-traumatic growth is what we would hope for, which is actually where we don't get back to our normal, we actually bounce higher. We go to an even stronger, better place, which is what I would hope. And I was talking to who was it? Like one of my Missouri Western practicum students about really their sense of loss of not having graduation. That's something to think about. You know, wouldn't that just be so sad if you were a high school senior and you're looking forward to all those wonderful things, and I don't know what it'll look like. Maybe they'll have some form of something at some point, who knows? But the way things are, I just don't really see, you know. Or a college graduate, and they said, yeah, like it's just, I had this big picture in my mind of my family all coming, and that's just not going to happen. Yes, I'll graduate, but it's not going to be the same. So recognizing that there will be some losses with this as well. Maybe some information sheets to parents. That would be good, to send something home. Look for these signs or symptoms, and your school's here ready to help. If your children is experiencing heightened anxiety due to this, going through this process.
Jean, I want to share my screen with you because this is something I've found pretty helpful.
Okay.
And I think maybe some other people might find this helpful too. So hopefully everybody can kind of see this. And to me, this really goes back to talking about the different parts of our brain and how they work together and how we move out of that survival mode.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So here's the sort of, as we're moving through this COVID pandemic, our first response is fear, right? And that's a certain part of the brain. So what part of the brain is acting there? And then moving through that fear to the learning zone. And then, like you say, the growth, where we emerge from this a different kind of person. I don't know if this helps, or if you wanted to kind of talk about that in relation to the brain and what's going on.
Right. Well, the very first zone would very much be that brainstem and limbic zone and limbic system, where we are just reacting. We're just, because you can only use so much toilet paper, and for crying out loud, there is none available anywhere. Like, I mean, we went out, a week and a half ago, and we went to Northbelt Walmart, and there wasn't any there. And we're like, oh, okay. And then we went to Sam's, and there was none there. And my husband said, I know, I bet maybe Lowe's or Home Depot, maybe, because people wouldn't think of there. They had zero also. And I'm like, wow, what a hot commodity, So people are just are like in that fear. So in order to move from the fear to more of a sense of calm, we have to try not to focus on us. We have to focus on, what can I do maybe to help others or to reach out. And I like what this says, where I stop compulsively consuming things that harm me, from food to news. It's very important to try to come up with a structure to your day, and not, get your schedule all messed up, and your hours of sleeping, and just binge watching TV and eating unhealthy things, because that just makes us feel worse physically, which impacts how we feel emotionally, obviously, the mind body connection. So concentrate on, how can I turn out even better than before? Like, what can I do? What can I learn? I could start to learn a new language. I could share that with my kids. That could be a really cool family activity. Let's learn one Spanish word a day, or one sentence, and let's start talking to each other in Spanish, or French or whatever. I was talking to a family about cooking. Like, they could all start cooking together once a week, and let's all come up with the menu, and find a new healthy menu active, that we can do, that's kind of fun. Turn it into something where this will make us better and stronger and closer, instead of staying in that fear zone. And I think that does have a lot to do with just that reactivity. And I find those clients that I have that were already kind of stuck there because of trauma are very much struggling in that zone, and having a hard time reaching out and thinking about the future, and how can I use this to my advantage. We can use it to our advantage. Not that we'd ever want it in a million years, but we have a lot of time to do things that normally we may struggle to get done, or maybe we've wanted to do. That'd be a cool thing. We should all go through and say something that we want to learn or do different during this time.
Sarah, is there a way that those of us that aren't very tech savvy can get a copy of your screen there?
Yes, I can put that up on the Glore Facebook page.
That would be fantastic.
Let's do that. And I have to tell you, honestly, I took it off somebody else's Facebook page and I don't even know who that was. So whoever put it together, I thought it was kind of just a nice summation of moving out of that fear brain and then through that learning mode and then into that sort of self-actualization, you know, becoming the best you that you can be through this process.
Yes. And you have to be in your cortex to do that. You have to be in the thinking part of your brain to say, how can I not just sit around and vegetate, but what can I do different? I know one thing I have done is I reorganized my entire bookshelves by content and area and authors. And I'm really excited about that because now, just like I did, I can go straight to a book and say, hey, I know where that is. So that's one thing I thought of as a good use of my time that will help me in the future. So little things like that. Does anybody else have a example or idea that they've done?
I've been working on learning ASL. I work with
Oh,
toddlers who have special needs, so a lot of them are nonverbal. So I already knew like a good handful of signs, but I've just been trying to work on learning more to communicate with them better.
excellent. Very good. Anybody else?
I've just been trying to be outside as much as possible, to go out of the house, just out in our yard. I've already planted flowers, which you're not supposed to do, but I'll just bring them in. I don't care. It just makes me feel good to see them in a pot.
Absolutely. Doing those things that fill us with joy, that we are able to.
Yeah, for sure. I went and took a walk around the yard and, you know, seeing all the spring flowers coming up, and I have some white violets and daffodils, and just really enjoying, you know, the weather is so nice and the time of year is perfect, and having extra time at home with the family. Homeschooling is a fun challenge, but I think it's just really important that we acknowledge that this is, for adults, traumatic. And that we're also adults that are trying to raise families and children. And so having that ability to cope in ways so that we don't cause trauma to the children is, I think, really important. And, you know, finding ways to cope is good right now for us to just be aware of.
And when we model that, that teaches our kids that they can make it through rough times in the future, right? Because we all go through times of uncertainty that are difficult. And so we don't know how this will end up and when it will end, but we focus on the good. We focus on what we're grateful for. We focus on growth, and that just keeps us going day by day.
So Jean, this would probably be a really good time to talk about resiliency.
Okay, yes. Resiliency is that ability to bounce back after you have been through adversity. And we all know people who, breast cancer survivors, for example, you know, they come back and they're like, wow, you know, I am ready to face anything after going through that. And it's an important quality. And I know that if we could bottle it, we would all just be super, super rich, because that's what it takes to be successful, to be able to say, yes, this is very difficult, but I will make it through it and I will come out on the other end, if not the same, better than before. And so resiliency can be learned. It really can. It can be something that we say, what works for me to keep me looking at the positive? A big part of that is gratefulness. And so I encourage you guys to consider a gratefulness practice every day. I've started doing that with my journal. I have a daily journal where I write down things I love from the books I read, and just, you know, experiences and things I'm learning and thinking. And so I think of something I'm grateful for every day, and I try to come up with as many different things as possible, which gets to be a challenge after a while. You're just like, dang, did I already say that one? But being grateful, being positive helps us to be resilient. It's when our thoughts turn to, oh, poor me, and is this ever going to end? And, like, how am I going to make it through this? And what about my pay? And all of those things that can be worry. We can't control what we can't control. We have to let go of that and do the best that we can. And that's what builds resiliency.
Well, I think we are at the end of the hour. And so are there any other questions? Or Jean, any last thoughts that you have before we finish this presentation?
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming together on this. I appreciate it, and I think that we all are learning every day, right? I do want to tell you the other books, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. You guys got that one, right? Another really good one is The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And this is an excellent book on trauma. And so with anything, when we want to know more about it, find the resources for it, and just consistently start to learn. And that's part of what builds resilience as well. In any area of our life that we want to improve, I think that we can apply that message of that's how we get better. And so I encourage you to do that. I encourage you to keep the faith during this time, because we'll all be okay. We may even come out of this a little wiser and smarter and better and stronger. And I do think people are looking more towards how they can help others. I've heard story after story of people doing kind deeds and reaching out that maybe wouldn't have happened if we hadn't gone through this. So maybe it will make us a kinder and gentler nation and out to help our fellow man. So that's my hope through this crisis. And that's what I think we should focus on.
Well, thank you so much,
Thanks so
Jean. We all appreciated that so much. And I'm going to turn off the